Good evening. Welcome to Contemplating the Universe. I'm glad you could join us this evening. Kulu sana wa antum taibin, to anybody who's celebrating the feast. And my name is Leslie Zehr. I'm the host for this evening, as well as being the speaker for this evening. And I hope you've caught some of our programs in the last couple of weeks. If you haven't, they're available for replay or as videos on YouTube. So I hope you'll be able to see those and listen to those. The reason for my moving into webcasts is basically twofold. I've been moving around a lot in the last year or two, so this is kind of a way for me to be able to do my work no matter where I am, and also to try to connect with people in different places, perhaps before I go there, or to stay in contact with the people here in Cairo when I'm not here at the center. And so webcasts seem to be a good idea to remove that obstacle of space and also the obstacle of time, because most of these webcasts are replayed. You don't necessarily need to listen to them live. If you do listen to them live, you have the opportunity to ask questions, and I'll explain how to ask questions. That point in the show where it's time to ask questions, I'll give you the call-in numbers, and also you can connect through Skype if that's easier. Let me just introduce myself, and I won't make it a long introduction. Everything is on my website and blog, so if you're interested, you can always go to those places as a reference. Basically, I'm the author of The Alchemy of Dance. Sacred Dance is a Path to the Universal Dancer, and I run the Center for Sacred Arts here in Cairo, as well as hosting this show. And I teach sacred dance. I have certificates in different modalities. But the main points, I think, that are relevant to tonight's talk are really the book and the work that I do with the sacred dance. And I'll explain to you more how I got into doing those two. I think it's really important for people to make contact, and I do believe that personal contact is the most important, but then I also think that you get a lot from seeing a person on video or listening to their voice. So I think that audio or video or these other means of communication, although they're not as favorable as personal contact, I think they're a good second, and probably more than writing is. For me, I have published a book. I do a lot of writing on my blog, writing articles, but somehow writing is just not getting it for me anymore. I feel that really listening to somebody's voice, you get at least one more dimension than you do on the written page. And also I found over time that many things that I write are misunderstood, and I think it's much easier to misunderstand something through writing than it is by listening to a person speak about the subject. That's another reason for doing the audio. I think it is important to make contact. I want to use this opportunity to present the work that I'm doing so that people know, is this something that you're interested in? Am I a teacher that you would be interested in working with? Because I think that's really important, just as much as it's important to feel comfortable with someone when you go to healing or any kind of work that you're doing with them. I think it's like that with your teachers as well. So I think this is an opportunity to at least hear me speak about what I do, and for you to have a better idea of whether this is something that's interesting to you or my philosophies, if they're in alignment with yours. I will be doing more webinars starting at the end of the month. So we have this weekly program, which is an interview program, and generally I'm interviewing someone else. As it turned out, I seem to have speakers lined up all the way through the end of November, but not tonight. So I took that as a sign that this was my place, so I'm taking that opportunity. And as I said, I'll be doing some webinars starting the end of the month. I don't have them all lined up yet. I do have the Hathor, Goddess of Love and Empowerment. That's going to start on the 11th of November. And then immediately after that, I'll do the Heroine's Journey. And all those things will be up on my website as I get them lined up, I put the information on my website, and a lot of it's on my blog, and I'll give you those contacts at the end. So, as I said, the reason for doing this talk tonight is to introduce you to my work. Hopefully you're interested in sacred dance, and I will be taking questions, so I do want to make it kind of a discussion as well, and for you to make contact with me, and also to reach a wider audience. I do like to go different places. I very much like to go different places and do these workshops, but I think that it's good to make contact, and this was something that I did in the beginning. I went to a lot of different places, and I would do just a 1-hour introductory talk, and I actually haven't done that for many years. And so preparing for tonight was really interesting for me. So I guess that's another part of it, is that it was an interesting journey for me to prepare for this talk, because it made me go back and look at my notes and look at my slides and to really go back through all of that and realize that I have also progressed, and where my work was several years ago and where it is now. So this has been an interesting journey for me as well, to prepare for this program tonight. And also, I would like to, when I do workshops, I'm often not in a place very long, so I would really like to be able to spend more time dancing and less time talking. So some of the workshops that I'm intending to do will be sacred dance workshops, and not necessarily, obviously, we're not going to be dancing, although you could be dancing on your own, I suppose. But what I want to do is sort of get the introductory material out of the way, give the introduction, and try to do a lot of the talking part of it online through webinars that could be accessed by people before I actually get to wherever I'm going. And then this would leave us just more time to do the actual dancing. So I don't think that this can replace the hands-on dancing together part of the workshop, but I think it can fill in with the just information part of the workshop. So that's going to be something that I'm working on in the next few months. And that's also why I wrote the book. I swore I would never write about the dance. Never say never. And so I wrote a book about what I had been doing. And the reason was that I didn't want people sitting and taking notes during the workshop. I wanted them to be present, to really be experiencing whatever is going on. But at the same time, I understand that you don't want to just come, listen to somebody, go home, and then think to yourself, oh, that's right, she said something about something, but I don't remember what it is. So that was the point of writing the book, and just kind of as a backup or as a reference, so that you do have it written down. But I think it's nice to have first contact as the experience. I believe that we need to experience things, be really present in the experience, and then go away and process it. So to facilitate that, I have written a book about the dance. And again, it's not a substitute for the class, because I really do think that hands-on or personal contact, and also the experience of dancing with other women, just to be in that whole energy of the dance, I think that's really important. So I want to continue doing that. And as I said, I hope to reach a wider audience and be able to do workshops in more places around the world. So that's hopefully in the future. So tonight the topic is sacred dance and the universal dancer. And I think in order to really talk about those things, that I need to kind of define those concepts, the concept of sacred dance. What do I mean by sacred dance? And also, what is the universal dancer, or what does that mean? So I think I'll start with the universal dancer. Before I begin with the universal dancer and what that is, I want to talk a little bit about archetypes. But just to first, for those who don't actually know what the universal dancer is, the universal dancer is the last card in the tarot. And the tarot basically is a pictorial representation of the alchemical process. And the last card being, as I said, the universal dancer. It's often called the world, the universe, or the universal dancer, depending upon which deck of cards you're using. And here we have the whole major arcana. When I'm talking about the archetypes, I'm talking about the major arcana. And here we have it laid out, the first 21 cards. And that's the major arcana. The Fool is 0, and we'll go into this a little bit more. But the last card is the universal dancer. And basically, that is the point of co-creation. And this is what we're working towards. This is what we're working towards in a spiritual practice, is working towards this point of co-creation. So, as I said, I use the archetypes, and I want to talk about that a little bit. What are archetypes, and why are they important, and why am I using this? Why am I even talking about the universal dancer as it's part of the tarot, and it's not necessarily related to dance specifically? I think that this dance that has come to me, and it's not only come to me, but this dance that I have channeled, and basically the book that I wrote and the work that I do is all exactly as it came in for me. So I don't take credit for any of this. This is all channeled information. It was just presented. I was the vessel. It came through me. I manifested it in the sense that I did the dance. This is how I learned to dance, these ancient temple dances. They just came through, but when they came through with a lot of information. And as I've told my students in the beginning when all of this was happening, and I'll go back to how it all happened, I would just dance with a notebook next to me because I just would channel information. You're in this state of no mind, and it's just, you're the vessel, it's all coming through. I would just write it down. I would have the experience of whatever that was coming in. I would write it down, and then later I would go and look at it. And also, being a Virgo with a Taurus moon, I need confirmation. I'm not going to just say, oh, this is what I channeled, and isn't this interesting? And I'm not making fun of people who channel information. It's just that you've got to align it somehow with reality and something that is concrete in the world to anchor it into something. And that was important to me. And there are often things that I have channeled that I have no idea what that really means or where it came from. And that's usually how I present it. I'll tell you, this is what this is, and I don't know what that means. But generally, the information that came in for the dance was confirmed. And that was a big part of my intention, was just, I want confirmation. I want to understand how this is a reality in this world and what it aligns with, that there may be things that we already know about. And that's what would happen in a very, just very easy kind of way. People would call me on the phone and say, did you know that whatever happens? And I would say, well, actually, yeah, I do know that, but now I know why. So the process was actually really easy. And I think that that's, when you're in alignment with what you're doing, and you set up an intention to do it in a way that you can do it or that makes sense to you, then I do believe that it really does unfold that way. So that was my intention, was to have some kind of confirmation, some kind of external confirmation. And in the end, everything is inside of us. Anything that we learn, any course that we take, anything that I'm saying to you, if it resonates with you, it's already inside of you. And if it doesn't resonate with you, think about it. But if it really doesn't resonate with you, then just put it to one side, and maybe it will resonate with you later. But if it doesn't right now, then that's fine. So this is kind of the process that I went through of how the dance came in. And I immediately started teaching this dance. I have no idea why. Opportunities just presented themselves, and I took them because I knew that I needed to do that for whatever reason. And I think that was mainly because I needed other people's experiences. I needed to be able to say to somebody, do this, and watch them do it or watch their reaction to it. And that gave me more information because up to that point I really had my own experience. So I've kind of gotten off the track here. I was talking about the universal dancer and archetypes. So let's get back to that, and at some point I will tell you more about how this came in the story. Archetypes. This is a term that was really popularized by psychologist Carl Jung. Archetypes, as he defined them, and by the way, archetypes are different if you're speaking to a psychologist or an anthropologist. And I'm going to give you a whole nother take on it, so it really doesn't matter. But Carl Jung, as I said, is the one that kind of popularized this for people. He even developed something called archetypal psychology. And I'm sure that most of you know about archetypes because it is something that's so common now just in our language. But my idea or my understanding of archetypes is slightly different. Jung was talking about archetypes being contained in the collective unconscious, which I believe is true. But I think now we have more language for that. And the collective unconscious is really the field. It's the 0-point field. And archetypes are vibrations. They're like bits of information, but they're little energetic patterns or essences. And when you reduce anything down to its most basic form, it's a wave pattern. And for me, this is what I work with, are essences. Everything in its essence. Everything in its lowest or most, when I say lowest, I mean most basic or primordial energy pattern. And ultimately, we can take everything back to this point. And this becomes really interesting because this is what takes us back to this field that everything exists in and connects us all. And we have access to all of this. This is really important because everything, and again, it's definitions and how you use words, but many things are archetypal. Jung talked about the archetypes as things like the warrior or the mother. Numbers are also archetypal. Colors are also archetypal. So I think if we begin to include all of that, then we have to realize that it is something bigger than just how it relates to, say, mythology or even to archetypes within ourselves. It's much bigger than that. And again, when we talk about totems and animals, this is archetypal. We talk about totems or power animals because they are archetypal. The snake within our psyche has a certain kind of energy. We can tap into that, and snakes themselves manifest that. So when we are talking about power animals, that's what we're doing. Again, we're talking about the archetype of the snake or the bat or the mouse or whatever, but we are talking about something that's very primordial. I came in contact with a woman, I think it was in 2005, who later became the dean. I teach the Alchemy of Remedies at the IMU, which is the International Metaphysical University, and she later became my dean, but I think it was 2005 that we met. And when we met, again, we had emailed, never spoken to each other or seen each other, but we had emailed for some time, and I was going to be in the U.S., and we decided to meet kind of halfway between where we were. And when we met for the very first time, she handed me these videotapes, and she just said, you have to have these. And she didn't really know me at all, but she felt I needed to have them. And they were Ian Lungold's talks about the Mayan calendar. So that, yes, that was a door opening, and that was what started my study of the Mayan calendar. And this was actually quite important, but one of the interesting things that came out of it was that on the Mayan Magic's website, there's a decoder that you can determine what your astrological, your tone and your vibration are based on the archetypes that the Maya use. So I found out that mine was the snake. And what it says about the snake is that it's all about the primordial wave. And when I read that, I thought, yes, that's it. That's my life. That's my focus. Everything to me is this wave pattern. This is how I respond to things. This is what I feel, and this is what I'm tapping into. So what I'm saying may not resonate with you at all, but if it does, then I think it's important information, and it's something that you can use in your own understanding. But as I said, my understanding of archetypes is that they are these vibrational, these very essential, primordial vibrational patterns that are contained in the collective unconscious, or the field, whatever you wish to call that field. And basically they are pieces of information, almost like a kind of DNA, but it's not necessarily a physical DNA, it's an energetic DNA. So it's this piece of information that can be decoded. So if we think of archetypes in this way, then it makes sense why this is active. For example, if you were to use the ways that we most commonly use archetypes are in mythology, in the tarot, in natal charts. But if you think about it as these energy patterns, then when you look at a natal chart, basically what you're doing is you're bringing together all these little strands, these little energetic vibrations. You're bringing them all together, and it's the sound that they make when they're played with each other that makes your unique vibration or your unique sound. So I think that's how, one way, that astrology makes sense, because you're bringing in all these little different things. And these archetypes, as I said, are like a bit of information or an energetic DNA, sort of. So it plays out. It's a little blueprint that plays out. And we know the story. If we're thinking about, as I mentioned earlier, the archetype of the mother, well, every mythology has the archetype of the mother, but it's always called something different. It could be Hathor, like it is in the Egyptian mythology, or Venus, or whatever. In any different mythology, it has a different name. The warrior has a different name for every culture and every mythology. But if you reduce it down to this essence, it's always the same. It's always the same feeling. It's always the same story that's playing out. Which is why, for me, once I really touched into these archetypes and them being vibrations, that's why suddenly I could just read natal charts and I could read tarot spreads, because I could feel it. It all made sense to me. It was all just there. It was just translating it into words. So again, different people experience things in different ways, but for me, this is it. I'm very kinesthetic, so I am experiencing these things as vibrations. And vibrations are always precursors to manifestation. So if something is vibrating at a certain frequency, then we know what that is, or we know how it's going to unfold. So as we go through our lives, we all feel these things. You know, everybody thinks that they were reincarnated. They used to be Nefertiti or something, or they must have been Isis. And this is so common for women to say, oh, I must have been the goddess Isis. Well, I don't think so. I think you just have that archetype inside of you. We all do. And I wrote a poem called Isis Eyes, which I think is on my website. And that's the point that I realized how that mythology played out in my lifetime, just as it does probably in 90% of the women on Earth. That story plays out for you at some point in your life. That's because that particular vibration is passing through you, and then you embody it, and somehow you manifest it, which actually makes it quite easy, because you know the end of the story. If you know the story, if you read mythology, you know how it goes, and you know where you're going when you get into that particular pattern. And work with it. use that energy. There's something to be learned there. Everybody has this desire to change everything, and I really don't think you're going to change the collective unconscious after, millions or billions of years of these things playing out. So why don't you just go with it, flow with it, navigate through it, and use that information? Mythology was always something that was very important in ancient cultures because it was telling you the story. Here are the stories. Here's how they play out. That's how it starts. That's how it ends. You'll live it someday in your life, so here it is. Same thing in Waldorf schools. They read fairy tales because fairy tales are, again, archetypal. And that's something that has come back into the consciousness of individuals and psychologists. There's lots of psychologists who probably they're archetypal psychologists, and they're using fairy tales as a means to allow people to understand the wisdom that's held in these archetypes, the things that they can teach us. So archetypes are very important, and basically the dance that I'm doing is based on these archetypes or these particular vibrations. So as I said, archetypes are something that ancient cultures very much tapped into with their mythology, and they had an active mythology. Ancient cultures had active mythologies, and we don't. And I think that this is a huge problem in the psyche of humanity at this point in time. We had a mythology where we had these netters, as they were called in ancient Egypt, these archetypes, but they were absolutes. They were perfection. They, Hathor or Isis, they showed us this example of perfection or this story in its purified form. Now we have celebrities, which we actually call stars, and they're human beings. So I think that this is a problem because we don't have those archetypal examples in our life in the modern psyche. And I think that this is a huge problem because it's flawed. If it's a human being, it's flawed. Somebody represents some archetype, but then they also, happen to use drugs or they're doing something very human-like that is not this perfection. Even if it's a perfection of something that seems like an undesirable aspect. When we think about Set, we don't necessarily think about him being the good guy, but he has something to teach us in a very essential, primordial, purified way. So that's an important lesson. Even if it's a lesson of destruction, it still has something to teach us. So by reading mythology, we can begin to understand this natural unfolding. In ancient Egypt, as I mentioned, the archetypes were called netters. And in the Pharaonic language, there are no vowels, as there aren't in Arabic. I think all the Semitic languages, I don't think, have vowels. I'm not certain about that. But ancient Egyptian did not have vowels. And so it's interesting when you look at this word netter, which we've put vowels into, but those letters, basically, the N, the T, and the R, were all symbolized by hieroglyphs. And I have a nice little slide of hieroglyphs. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the slide for netter written as a hieroglyph because I seem to have accumulated too many pictures and I couldn't find it. But anyway, just to give you a feel, these are actual hieroglyphs, and I think I took this picture at Dendara Temple. And honestly, I don't know what it says. I see Mat there in the middle. She's the one that's seated with the feather on her head and the Ankh symbol on her knees, and we'll get back to her in a minute. But anyway, these are hieroglyphs, and you can see this pictorial form that actually it has a vibration of its own, which we'll talk about in a moment. But netter, getting back to netter, so it had these three symbols that symbolize the N, the T, and the R. And basically, it means archetype. And as you'll notice, if you take this N, T, and R, if you put vowels into it, you're also getting nature. stick a couple of A's and U's and whatever. And in almost every language, nature is some form of those three consonants with different vowels and maybe different pronunciation. It may be nature or natur or something like this, but it always has the consonants, those three consonants, because archetypes are nature. They are the manifestations of these energies, this nature in form. So that's basically my take on archetypes. And I said that becomes important because in the universal dancer, the concept of the universal dancer, we're going to be tapping into these energies of these different archetypes. So we want to understand fully what these archetypes are. So another thing, as I said, archetypes are also manifested in different ways as colors or numbers. And this is another thing about the ancient Egyptian, the pharaonic period. As you can see, I believe this is Sekhmet on the left. She has a lioness's head. Now, the ancient Egyptians were clearly a shamanic culture, but for whatever reason, through most of history, it seems, anthropologists and archaeologists didn't seem to talk to each other or something, because I think any anthropologist would say clearly that this is a shamanic culture, and that would explain so much about what we're seeing in front of us and their philosophies and how they thought about things. We have those energies, those archetypal energies. The lion is about courage. It's also about devouring. And if you think about Sekhmet, if you think about the archetype of Sekhmet, which is often when we're talking about Hathor and Sekhmet being a duality, that was the attractive, aggressive goddess, the aggressive side being Sekhmet. Well, Sekhmet later became the warrior goddess. But if we're talking about the feminine, we're talking about the subtle realm. And a warrior on the subtle realm is basically a healer. So this devouring aspect that Sekhmet has in this feminine manifestation comes out as the healer, devouring disease. Again, just looking at these carvings and seeing her there with that lioness's head gives you a feeling. It's a vibration. And you can tap into the greater meaning of what this is by representing something in this very archetypal form, such as having a lioness's head. Now, when we're talking about sacred dance, well, I actually didn't explain the concept of the universal dancer yet, so let me go into that. As I said, we're talking about the archetypes. And basically, the dance that I teach, this alchemy of dance, is really just the first line of the tarot. So what I'm teaching is basically just this very first line of the tarot, moving through from the Fool to the Chariot. And I do talk about the universal dancer, obviously, since that's what this concept is. But we're using those energies of that first line of the tarot to define the different stages that we're moving through. And as I said, the tarot is this representation of the alchemical process, where ultimately we're moving to the universal dancer. Now, this concept of the universal dancer becomes very important when we're talking about sacred dance, because we're talking about co-creation. And it's kind of interesting to think about this. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the history of sacred dance. But the point we want to get to is this point of co-creation, which is actually where we started when we look back at the history of sacred dance. We actually started in this very unified spiritual place. But as with any alchemical process, it's always about separating out, doing different processes, and then bringing things back together. So we've been in this huge period of separation, which the Maya defined from 3114 BC up until 2011. So we were in that period of separation, and that was an opportunity to learn. But now we're moving back into this union. And this union is the union of the divine masculine and divine feminine. Through history, again, as the Maya explained, we've moved through different periods where the feminine was dominant, this past period where the masculine energies were dominant, and now we're moving into this period where the two of them will stand equally next to each other, inshallah. So, which is the period of co-creation. So I keep getting sidetracked and not really defining what the universal dancer is, but basically it is that ultimate point of co-creation where we're dancing with the universe. And co-creation, people who are still in this left brain control-oriented mentality want to believe that co-creation means that I get to tell God or the divine what I want. And I don't believe that that's true at all. We're moving to alignment with the divine. We are physically manifested. The divine is an energy around us. It animates us. So the goal in becoming the universal dancer is really surrender. Surrendering to those energies, to that cosmic order, and tapping into that. And the dance that we do with the divine is this constant readjusting, this constant rebalancing, and allowing the divine to move through us, allowing ourselves to become the vessel, which is very humbling, and to be filled with this energy of the divine. This is our unfolding. This is our destiny, and I hesitate to use that word because it means so many different things and it's charged. Different people have a different feeling about that. So let's just talk about divine unfolding. But to come to our highest potential, as Eckhart Tolle is talking about in his book, we want to unfold into our highest potential. That highest potential are the seeds that were planted inside of us that make us unique. So this co-creation is our unfolding. It's allowing that energy to move into us and to become the universal dancer in this cosmic dance. So, as I said, these are the representations in two different tarot decks of the world, the universe, the universal dancer. But I think that there's a problem with both of them, because they are trying to show you something that incorporates the two. So usually the character is a hermaphrodite or someone that you cannot define what sex they are. But I think that that's kind of missing the point, because those of you who have either read my book or done my workshop know that at the very beginning we talk about the dragon and how the dragon is this amalgamation of those four power animals, the snake, the bat, the lion, and the fish. And as you can see in the dragon, we can tell these feet, these are lion's paws. The tail is a fish's tail. So these things come together, as they do in the first part of the dance, but they're still clearly separate. And unfortunately, I think that that's what they've done with this depiction of the universal dancer. We're still seeing these separate things. To me, better representations of the universal dancer would be the Vesica Pisces or the yin-yang symbol, which interestingly enough means diagram of supreme ultimate. I never knew that until I was trying to find some slides for today, and I just think that's so profound, the diagram of supreme ultimate. This to me is a better representation of the universal dancer. It even looks like it's moving. It's like it's in this cosmic dance. And then that little hieroglyph that I showed you in the very beginning that I said was Mat, and here's another one. I think this is a beautiful picture. Again, I don't know what it says. I don't know how to read hieroglyphs. but that's Mat as well. And she is cosmic order. So this dance that we're tapping into, and it is a dance of polarities because we are manifested. We are in a polar world. But we want to, together with the, if you're a woman, with the masculine energies, create that co-creation that brings you to that place of cosmic order. So ultimately, that's what we're looking for, is this cosmic order, or to tap into that energy of Mat, or that universal dance. So I've been speaking for a long time about the archetypes. So I think that I should move on to speaking about sacred dance and how that all ties together. So as I said, the ultimate place that we're trying to get to is this universal dancer, which I believe is actually where we begin. And I think a good analogy is just to think about maybe the baby in the womb and that symbiotic relationship between the mother and the baby that's very unconscious and is, again, a kind of universal dance. It's just interesting to think about the baby in the womb, how she is, or he is, responding to the mother, and that you know, by moving, she's actually dancing in there and responding to whatever stimulus she's getting from the mother. It's a fascinating thing. I have to say, my daughter's pregnant, so this whole concept has again just been opened up in my mind, and I think about that a lot, just how that dance that the child is doing in the womb. When we think about dance or the history of dance, I think in the beginning all dance, and probably all singing also, was universal. I mean, was the universal dancer and this sacred dance. We began in caves, and I love this picture. This is actually a cave in Argentina, but interestingly enough, this same technique of putting the hand on the wall and then blowing the paint over it is actually found all around the world. And this to me is just like so profound in that this is a community. You know, they all have their handprint there. And because these people did this, how they were inspired to do it, but because they did it is why we can carbon date these caves. It's this handprint because they blew it over their hands. And because they blew it over their hands, there's saliva in the paint. And saliva, because it's organic, and having studied organic chemistry, I reserve the word organic for anything that contains carbon, not something that's a dance or something else. It is actually a substance that contains carbon, which is why we can carbon date it. So because there is this organic material in saliva, we can actually carbon date it. So they left us such a gift with this by allowing us to know how far back they've been doing these dances in these caves. And so these date back tens of thousands of years. So our history has moved back. In the last few years, we have opened doors that have taken us back further in time. So why I'm talking about the caves is because these were the first sacred spaces. This is Lascaux, I believe. And look at this. This is a womb. And the ancients, the really ancients, always used a cave as their sacred space because it was like a womb. In biogeometry, we know that caves and pyramids and domes, which is why there are domes in mosques and cathedrals, all give off a very special frequency, the same frequency that the womb gives off. And this is a sacred space, and it creates a certain kind of energy. So the dances that were done in these times really were sacred dances. They were rituals and ceremonies, and that's what dance was about in that period of time, was that it started out as something. And when I'm talking about sacred dance, the word that really comes to mind is the divine, that it includes the divine, or that it is a divine expression. It's not devoid of the divine. So we have different types of dance, and then dance began to move into something else. It began to move into healing, which still was part of the divine, that divine cosmic order, and then it became a means of expression. So we kind of moved from this very internal place to something that becomes more external. And this, of course, makes a lot of sense because this is how our history has gone. This was the separation. And we began to separate more and more. Things became more and more external. And I'm not saying that something that's an expression is necessarily something only that's external, but I think that if you're talking about expression, then there's always an observer in a way. There's always that sort of external force. And I think that that's important, because what we want to do with sacred dance, at least what I want to do with it, or what I'm trying to teach, is how to make it more internal again. It's not a performance. It's something that you do for yourself. And although it may be an expression of how the divine moves through you, there's still that important aspect of it being very internal. Not that there isn't an external aspect to it, but that the point of it is this very internal place. So we began with the dance or movement from ceremony and rituals in caves that were these ecstatic experiences, moving to healing, and then moving to expression. So we were really moving from the transpersonal to the personal. And again, we're embodying it. So historically, we are embodying it, and personally, we are embodying it. But then, of course, when we move to the age of separation, we begin to lose then the more divine, or the more... And again, this is part of the alchemical process, this separation. As we separate out, we begin to examine each part of it. So that needed to be done. And we needed to look closely at these things. But now I think it's time to bring all of those pieces together and recollect and now use it all together, hopefully at a higher vibration, that's something that's more inclusive. So when I'm talking about sacred dance, I'm talking about a co-creative process. I'm talking about something that includes the divine. That's on a more theoretical level, so to speak. And just to go through this, since I do have these slides, I'll show them, because it's kind of a progression. So we went from the caves, and then we went from caves to kind of crypts and underground chambers. And I'm showing you this because in my own process, this is a very significant place. This is in Upper Egypt. This is at Abydos. This is the Osiris or the Osirian. And it's very ancient. No one's quite sure how ancient it is. But Seti first built his temple going around this, so clearly he knew it was there. And it's a very interesting place. The energy of it is quite magnificent, so I just kind of wanted you to see that, to experience the energy of that. And that's water. If you look, those doors lower down, what's dark in front of them is actually water. This fills with water, which is fascinating. They don't know where the water comes from. And it's very healing water, by the way. And I think it's also that water is there to protect whatever it is that we're not supposed to be messing with at this point in time. And then moving to crypts. This is a crypt below Dendara Temple. And again, I'm showing you these pictures just to give you a feel for these sacred spaces. And that's a huge concept in sacred dance, is the sacred space that you are in, to allow yourself to be in that place where you can be free to become the vessel. And this is a huge part of the divine masculine, which we are not going to talk about today, but this creating the actual space, the more external space, so that the divine can move in and we can have these very profound sacred experiences. This is Beni Hassan, which I hadn't actually ever been to until Dan First and I led this Sacred Sounds tour in the spring. And I'm showing this because this is quite interesting. The paintings on the walls here are of people doing something that looks a lot like yoga or judo. So it's a very interesting, it would be interesting to have somebody actually go in there that was more knowledgeable about things like judo and yoga and look at it and see what's really going on there. And this is the Holy of Holies in Dendara Temple. And again, we're going deeper and deeper and deeper until we get to this very sacred space right at the center. And many people have suggested that the Holy of Holies actually represents the pineal gland, which is right in the center of our head. And this is just to give you an idea of the temples. This is Hathor's temple, Dendara. And I'm going to talk more about that in Hathor, the Goddess of Empowerment webinar that's coming up. So I'm just talking about sacred spaces here, and I do think that the sacred space is a huge part of the sacred dance, that it is like a womb in which we are rebirthing ourselves. The dance itself becomes a kind of moving meditation, or for me it's like a Tai Chi for women. It's a very feminine movement in which you allow yourself to become the vessel. And I think there's many ways to do this. What I'm teaching is just one form of it, but this sacred dance is an embodiment, as I said, this co-creation, this becoming the universal dancer. That's our goal when we do the sacred dance. It's quite a powerful experience. And as I said, there's many ways to have this experience. There are many different kinds of dance, and you really need to find the one that resonates with you. This is the one that came in for me, and I'm just sharing the experience step by step because I learned it, and it came in step by step, and I just see myself as a scribe or walking the priestess path. I think when I first started my journey, I was walking the path of the Hierophant, which is really the high priest. It's about studying ancient scriptures. I did do a lot of reading. And then in 2002, when I had this attunement in Abydos, which is why I showed you that picture, everything changed for me. And that was the point for me where I became the vessel, where I just opened up to being able to just allow this information to come through me. And what I found was that this is a lot easier. For me, walking the priestess path was a lot easier because the priestess basically, as an archetype, is the messenger of the gods. She's the one that allows herself to become the vessel, and the information just comes in and she brings it in. So I found that a lot easier than to be able to tap into those energies, to be able to tap into the field, than to actually sit there and study and memorize. And I was never good at that. I mean, in school I wasn't good at that. So I think that, my life has led me to this point in that I can adapt and I can navigate, and that was the process that finally came. And again, it's about trusting and having faith and listening and hearing whatever it is that's coming in. I don't feel that we've really completely covered this subject, but I don't want this to go on too long. I like the presentations to be about an hour, so I don't want to make it too extensive, and we can always do it again. So I want to thank you all for coming and listening. If you were interested in what I'm talking about, please email me for more information or look on the website, the blog. So thank you for coming, and I hope that you will be joining us again. Thank you.